Okay, let's move on from that anyway. So next question. I've been pushing myself hard in training to improve my cycling performance, but I'm worried about overtraining. What are the early signs and symptoms of overtraining that I should be aware of, both physically and mentally? How can I balance pushing my limits with adequate recovery to avoid overtraining? Do you have any specific strategies for monitoring training load, ensuring proper nutrition, and adding rest and recovery days into my schedule? Additionally, how can I adjust my training intensity and volume if I suspect I'm approaching an overtrained state? And that's from Jose. Jose's taking the piss. He's got about 20 questions in there.
Look, I don't want to sound condescending, but the answer to that is that's a coach's job. That's how you figure it out. This is not like I can give you a couple of pointers and stuff to look out for here, but that's where a coach earns his money. Like any fool can throw up training sessions on Training Peaks. Where a coach earns his money is knowing where that edge is between pushing an athlete and overtraining, and when he slightly steps, because you're always just slightly stepping across the line when you're trying to maximize performance. But the thing to realize is, especially if you're self-coached, like it sounds like Jose is, and you don't understand where that line is, you will be better off taking 10 steps back from the line, because you're better off being 1%, sorry, you're in a much worse position if you're 1% overtrained than if you're 20% undertrained. So 1% overtrained, it's game over. 20% undertrained, you're still pretty fine. Like you can pull a performance out. Not going to be your best performance, but it's going to be a lot better than the 1% overtrained performance.
It's a real science, isn't it? Like it's very complicated. The human body is an extremely complicated machine. So to get all of this right, it's tough. It's tough to figure out on your own.
There's some data that can really help, and then there's some markers that can really help. I think if you have persistent fatigue, if you're writing into a cycling podcast, you're probably overtrained as the first sign. But I think outside that, if you have persistent fatigue, like you feel tired in the morning when you wake up, you need more naps than usual, that's definitely a sign. Decreased performance on those key power metrics. John Wakefield, when I had him on the podcast, go back and search that on the YouTube channel. He advocated a sub-maximum fatigue test, and he runs through the protocol on that, which can tell you if you're coming up on fatigue or if you're not going to get an adaptation from your training. Muscle soreness, elevated morning resting heart rate. And like this is where I lean heavily on Whoop, because I look at morning heart rate to see if I have any deviations from my baseline. I look for heart rate variability to see if I have deviations from my baseline. And then I'm pairing that data measurements, because on their own, they're helpful, but it doesn't give you the whole picture when you start to pair them with those subjective measurements like fatigue, decreased performance, or you're starting to pick up illness more frequent, you have weight loss fluctuations, loss of appetite, sleeping poorly, like feeling like it's taking you longer to get to sleep or disrupted sleep during the night. I think all that is signs that you're
overtrained.
Pretty close. I always think saddle sores is one as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, it's a real dip off in my motivation to train. So there'll start appearing a lot of gaps in my training peaks, and that's a big sign where if I'm moving sessions around a lot, saying, I'm not going to train today, I'm going to actually do that session tomorrow, or I'll move that to my rest day on Friday. For me, it's the motivation, like psychologically it kind of gets into me. And then also your mood. I think if you're overtrained, you're going to be cranky because everything's going to be irritating you. You're going to be a little bit short with the people that you love. Things that probably wouldn't have stressed you out before.
It's kind of the same if you're overworked.
Yeah, it's a stressor. It's just another type of stressor. So all of those indications. So
I think to answer, I know he's a multi-pronged question. I think some of them I can point them, like the John Wakefield one, point you back to listening to that podcast because it's 90 minutes of gold. Another one to look at in your data, which John Wakefield doesn't talk about, is CTL. That's chronic training load. That's a running total of what our fitness is like over the past 40 days. So CTL, I would look at a maximum ramp rate of 5 to 8 points. So week 1 to week 2, you don't want to be increasing more than 5 to 8 points. If you are ramping more than that for more than 2 weeks at a time. Like if you do it 2 weeks in a row, we'd call that like a super compensation block. If you're north of 8 CTL, if you're constantly pushing that, that's also a sign. And his last part on that was on fueling for that and how you adjust fueling. I'll just point you back to that Yuri Carlson podcast, which I thought was a brilliant, it's nearly our reference podcast at this point for pointing people to when they want to know about fueling and how to cycle carbohydrates, because it's really important to fuel the body, because the body can't produce adaptations in a surplus. So you need to be fueling the body adequately. Even if you're trying to cook calories on a macro view, micro day to day, you need to be giving it the fuel it needs to fuel those sessions, and then you cut back on the rest days.
You meant to say you can't get adaptations in a deficit.
In a deficit,
in a deficit. Sorry, you said surplus. So just not to confuse people. I think that's really important. Look, I think this guy, Jose, seems to be very dialed in. He had a lot of really good questions there. So he's obviously, this is something that's concerning him. For me, and Anthony drills this into me every single week, is basically journal your training, because so I don't write it down in a journal. I don't have a dear diary, but in my training peaks, I write notes about how I felt, how the session went, loads of like minute details. And you can look back on all of that, and same with your food, and say, okay, this is probably where I didn't really quite knock it on the head this week.
What I tried to get you to do, and you've been actually getting much better at it, is to be proud of your training peaks. When you log into your training peaks, you want to see, you want to see all the greens, but you want to see the feedback. You know, is your Whoop connected into your training peaks? So you're getting that complete picture. So you can say, here's the training I've done, here's how well recovered I am, and now here's a mini little diary entry with my subjective feedback. So then if you do start working with a coach, or you have a period where you're going back to analyze yourself, you're not looking at stuff in a vacuum going, oh, an amazing day there, why was that? Or the terrible day there, why was that? We have data to inform that picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jose, thank you for writing in.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.